A very good morning to all of you joining us for the session today on the effects of COVID-19 on the US job market. Joining us today is Newton Porter, founder and CEO of CareerScore.com, an organization started in 2013 with an aim to provide US schools with end-to-end career solutions, and by extension, the young students. Since then, Newt and his team have helped thousands of students with the job search. I won't take much time before beginning the session. We have about 60 minutes today. For the first half, Newt would take us through the impact of COVID-19 on the job market, the strategies for the job search, and the suggested way forwards, and countless other things that Newt would have planned for you guys. The next 30 minutes will be all about your questions. Well, without any further ado, I will transfer the rights to Newt.
Thanks so much for the introduction. Glad to be speaking with you all today. As Arbaz mentioned, I'm Newt. I'm the co-founder of CareerScore. We started back in 2013, and really the company started my final year at university. I was fortunate enough to get a job offer very early on in my last year of studies, and because of that, a lot of my friends came to me for guidance. They weren't quite getting the support that they wanted and needed on campus, so I rolled up my sleeves and I helped them one-on-one. I analyzed the job market, did some matching to help them identify roles that they would be a good fit for. Really enjoyed the process and turned it into a business after I graduated. So I've been doing this for a number of years. I've worked with students right out of school. I've worked with people who are later in their career and trying to transition. So I've seen how job search has changed over the past 5 years or so, and happy to chat with you today about how to approach your job search strategy and some modifications you might want to make due to COVID. So when it comes to your job search strategy, I always like to think about it like a funnel, right? And the reason for that is it's very easy, especially right now, to get discouraged. As you start applying to jobs, you're reaching out to different companies, you're doing it through LinkedIn, Indeed. A drop off is completely natural, right? Not every job that you apply to, you're going to get in contact with, you're going to get an interview at, so on and so forth. So if you are actively in your job search, I don't want you to stress about that. It's very normal, and you have to think about it like a process and commit to it. So after you kind of start establishing your process, what I want to talk about is discovering jobs and kind of some modifications due to COVID that you want to think about as you're approaching your search strategy. So there are a few places and sources I want to share with you to look online. So one segmentation you could think about is looking for startups versus more corporate opportunities. For startups, you could check out AngelList or BetaList, which are more smaller companies, largely in tech. And then some of your big names, which you're likely familiar with, LinkedIn, Indeed, ZipRecruiter, which more established, Fortune 500 companies typically post on. Now, if you are in tech and you're looking for engineer-specific roles, you can check out Dice, Stack Overflow, GitHub, which you're likely familiar with, and Built-in is a tool that's in a few, larger cities that tends to cater more towards, the startup tech ecosystem for job opportunities. Now, given COVID and just the way the world has been going in general, I think that more companies are shifting towards remote work and remote first. So here are a few job boards that are specifically for remote opportunities. So We Work Remotely, Remote.co, Remote OK, Remote Planet, so on and so forth. And just so you know, I'll be compiling these and sharing some of these resources along with the slides after the presentation, so you'll get quick access to all these great sites to source opportunities. Now, if you're looking for contract work, two of the biggest ones that I recommend are Upwork and Freelancer. There's also Fiverr, but it tends to be much smaller projects. these two, you can pick up more long-term kind of sustainable contract opportunities. For internships or apprenticeships, we recommend Way Up and internships.com. Now, when you're looking for jobs, there's a few things that you want to do in kind of sorting through the opportunities when you're searching on all these sites that I mentioned. So, obviously you want to look at job titles. You might want to zoom in to particular skills that you have or are interested in learning. Location, which is becoming less prominent today because of the nature of COVID. Now, a couple of considerations. So if you are looking for sponsorship, OPT, you can use what are called Boolean searches to look for job postings that specifically flag this stuff. So when you're searching on LinkedIn or Indeed, you can put some of these criteria in quotes into your search fields, and that'll surface job postings that list this in there, and you can quickly identify those that at least mention sponsorship and quickly parse out whether they do support OPT and visa sponsorship or not. So I think that's probably an important thing to consider if that is important to you. Now, another modification in terms of sourcing jobs right now is seeing who's actually hiring. And this has always been an issue. It's estimated that a third to half of jobs on LinkedIn are from companies that aren't actually hiring, but that's elevated a little bit because of COVID. So there are a couple ways that I recommend trying to identify who is actually hiring. So one is a tool called Candor. It's candor.co, and they have a tracker of companies who have frozen hiring. And again, I'll share this at the end along with the slides, but they are tracking companies who are actively posting roles, bringing candidates into the hiring process, so you can take a look at that. Another is a cool, quick trick through LinkedIn. So if you go on LinkedIn, you can search within the content tab of LinkedIn. And if you search in quotes, starting a new job, you can see people within your extended network or people who have engaged or liked the updated status who have actually started a new job. So maybe it's not someone you know directly, but someone who's in your extended network, a second or third connection who's gotten a new job. You can check out the company that hired them, and they're likely still hiring because that'll sort it by ones that have happened within the past few weeks. And that's a quick way to, get to the root of companies that have been hiring within the past month. All right, so that's kind of, we've been talking about sourcing right now. So let's talk about actually applying to jobs and some things you might want to consider. So the common question, particularly for entry to mid-level jobs that I've gotten when I've worked with people is, do I apply or do I not apply, right? You might feel underqualified. You might feel like you can do the job and you're not quite sure how to convey that. How do you let an employer know that you can grow into the role? And I think especially now, you might be applying to opportunities in a little bit more aggressive fashion and kind of stretching it. So let's talk about how you can actually understand which roles you should apply for and how to convey that you're a good fit. So when it comes to looking at job requirements, you really need to decode it a little bit. You need to read between the lines and understand that even just a couple of words can make a very big difference. So oftentimes employers will way overstate what they need. The classic case are, employers within, technical computer science fields asking for, 5 years of experience for an entry-level role. And sometimes you'll see them asking for, years of experience in a particular skill set or language that the language has only been around for a year or two, and they're asking for 3 to 5 years. So oftentimes you have to think about it from the employer's point of view. They are trying to cast a net to find people who overlap with their requirements, but they're never going to find someone who checks every single box, right? So the way that I try to, explain it is you want to at least line up with half of the requirements, and some of them are more flexible than others. So, years of experience, if you do have projects or things that map to all the skills that companies are hiring for, it's worth reaching out if you're confident you can move forward and grow into a role, right? But if there's a hard requirement, say on security clearance or something like that, which you don't have, obviously it might not be the right role to apply for. So if you do overlap on some of them, what I recommend doing is doing a cover letter, and not your classic cover letter where you write up a couple paragraphs, which does work, but recruiters are so stretched for time right now that we're recommending a modification to the classic cover letter. And what it's called is a T cover letter. And what it is you have a few sentences introduction to the company. You let them know that you're very interested in the role, that you've analyzed the requirements, and you've shortlisted your qualifications that map to them, right? So let's say it's a technical role and they want someone who has X, Y, and Z programming languages, or if it's a marketing role and they want someone who has done paid marketing, digital marketing, or has analytics experience, you list that requirement and then you show them side by side in just a table what your relevant experience is. And this might be a project you've worked on, right? But you got to think about what the recruiter is doing, and back to my kind of cast the net analogy. So they're trying to check the box as quickly as possible and make sure that there's at least enough overlap to merit reaching out to you. So by structuring your cover letter like this, you're basically giving them a checklist, right? So if they can go through those requirements and check by just glancing at your qualifications, they're much more likely to reach out to you to see, if an interview makes sense and to move the process forward. So this is a way to kind of quickly cut through their typical screening process. So when it comes to applying online, I think you need to go beyond just your classic, send in a resume and forget about it. Especially right now, you need to try, the T format cover letter. You need to really, try to find a person, a human at this company. As scary as that might seem, I know it can be intimidating, trying to just reach out to someone you don't know. And we can kind of talk through that a little bit. So what we've done, and what I'll talk through now, is deconstructing how to do that using LinkedIn. So let's say, you're looking at United Airlines, you happen to be located in Chicago. So you can use LinkedIn's advanced filtering to find people at the company. So let's say, I applied to a role at United. I'm looking at a role in Chicago. What you can do now is look at United, Chicago, and try and search your connections or secondary connections. So we're going to talk about a few different types of people you might reach out to and how to approach it. So the first one we're going to talk about are recruiters. So there's a difference between an in-house recruiter at a company versus an external recruiter at a staffing company. We're talking about internal recruiters. So, these folks that I pulled up here all work at United. So you want to understand their role. They're trying to fill these positions and make sure you check the box on at least half of the criteria to then move you into the hiring process. So in order to move forward, you want to be found by them and be seen. You want to also understand their domain expertise. So maybe they have a title of recruiter, but they're recruiting for the marketing department and you're trying to get into the engineering department, right? So you can reach out to them, look at their profile, see if there's any clarification there, and see if they're the one hiring for the role, or if they can put you in touch with the person who's managing the hiring process. you want to build a relationship with them. So if you just reach out and you're like, hey, look at me, I'm interested in this role, it's probably not going to connect as much as saying, hey, I saw this, piece of news on your company that you all just announced this new initiative, that you all just, had this big milestone. It looks very interesting. I've applied to such and such role. Are you managing the hiring process for this, right? So like you're leading with an interest in the company and the organization, or something with them personally, that you've identified. So that's recruiters. Let's talk about employees. So let's say you're applying to, in this case, a cybersecurity role. So it's a cybersecurity role at United. You can look up people in United in Chicago with that cybersecurity focus, and you can, let's say it's the same role. It's a junior cybersecurity role. I can reach out to Ariel here and be like, hey, I've just applied to this role. We actually went to the same school. We're alumni. I'm curious, what was the interview process like, right? Or another approach could be like, I'm interested in this sort of opportunity. Can you tell me what a day in the life is, right? Like, I want to know what it's like to actually be in that sort of role. You're much more likely to strike up a conversation with that sort of approach than just say, hey, like, would you refer me, right? Especially if you don't, like, it's different if you know this person, but we're talking about people who are kind of cold connections. So that would be a way to reach out to someone in the role or similar role that you're talking about. Now, if you're talking about someone who's more senior, you might want to ask them, kind of similar approach to the recruiter and like latching onto a piece of news. So, I noticed you're hiring for a number of roles. I'm interested in the opportunity. Can you tell me more about like the direction that the company, that like this division is going, right? So similar to that kind of approach, but you want to lead with these sorts of things and have some kind of like inside research on the company to get a conversation going. The last one is leadership, and I don't necessarily recommend reaching out to the senior leadership at these companies, but I think what you can do is you can learn and get kind of the information you would need to better reach out to, say, someone who's a junior or who would be your direct manager. So oftentimes you can follow senior leadership at these companies and kind of just like scroll through their engagement and understand like new things that are happening. So for instance, they just became part of the CISO coalition, and like, what does that actually mean for the company? And that gives you something concrete to then parlay into a conversation. And you want to be authentic, right? Like, if you are genuinely interested in these opportunities and these companies, like, try and build a connection with someone, right? It shouldn't just be a transactional exchange. So, for instance, following this thread of United, it looks like Ariel, who happened to be an alumni of, our school, is part of this bug bounty program, that looks like it's open to the public from my quick research. So maybe when you reach out to Ariel, you can ask about that bug bounty program, and that can be a really great way to start building a relationship with people at the company, further your skills, and potentially lead to an interview job, right? So in terms of application cadence, we recommend building kind of a schedule and routine. So I would recommend applying to at least 10 jobs a week, and you really need to hustle. It's not good enough now with the way the job market is during COVID to just apply to jobs, send in your resume, and hope for the best. You really need to be trying to reach out to people, working on your cover letter. You really got to hustle. It's key. And it's, part of that is applying to jobs, part of that is studying so you're ready for interviews, and part of that is also finding other opportunities to connect. And it's not just, you used to be able to go to a networking event, go and meet up with someone, have a beer or listen to a speaker. All of that is going online. But the good thing is that, the platforms that we're using are largely the same, at least for finding them. So you can still go to meetups, you can still go to Eventbrite, you can check, your newsletters to find these events. And then you can follow up with people. So follow up with the speakers at these events or webinars, and try to, start a conversation, learn more about their organization, see ways you can get engaged, leverage some of the LinkedIn strategies that we talked about to show that you can provide value, right? Follow up on any of these events, people you meet. It's a little harder directly, like online in a webinar format, particularly to build some of these connections. But sometimes events have breakout sessions. But to the extent you can and you get contact information, you should try to build that bridge, and establish a connection there. So let's talk about, like, once you actually do get in contact, with a company that you've applied to using some of the LinkedIn strategies or through a virtual event, right? You have to be more aggressive in your contact strategy. I know I keep hammering this home, but it's so important right now. It's a competitive market, and you need to put in that extra effort. So, here's a lean version of kind of a contact strategy. So find a primary contact for a job that you applied on LinkedIn to. So like someone within your network that you can reach out to, and see if they can help you understand the role or connect you with the hiring manager or provide a referral to move you through the process, right? Then, following that application, you want to follow up with either that contact or establish a new one if you haven't been able to get a response yet. Here's a blown out version of that, right? And I give this to you, you don't need to follow this to a T. It's just to give you an idea of the things you need to be doing to get through the hiring process with how, with how the market is right now. You really do have to be proactive. So I'm going to talk, let's say, you got in contact, you're ready to go, they've got you set up, and you're going to have an interview, right? So there are a ton of changes to interviews in moving online. So let's just talk a little bit about interviewing virtually during COVID and some things you need to think about. So you have to do your research on the company. So come in there having looked at the site, understanding what they do, why you want to work from them. If it's for a particular like technical role, like understand to the best you can elements specific to their company. So if that's engineering, what's their tech stack? What are their products? If that's marketing, take a look at their social and understand, some of the way that they communicate as a brand, right? So check out their site, LinkedIn, Twitter. A good hack is you can set up Google Alerts for the company, and that'll tell you anytime there's new news. So similar to the outreach strategy, if you find something that's like an announcement for the company, that's a great thing to kind of use within an interview to kind of show that you care, and also like springboard into other discussions and topics. So a few types of interviews, so like technical tests, phone screens, one-on-ones, panels, department heads, all of this is happening virtual now, right? And every company is going to have their own hiring process, but you should expect to at least go through 2 to 3 rounds of interviews. So let's talk a little bit about things you need to consider specifically during COVID and virtual interviews, right? So might seem basic, but know your video tool. So companies all use different ones. You don't want to be 5 minutes before the interview and all of a sudden you realize you have to install some thing to get WebEx working. You have to restart the program once the interview starts because you don't have permissions, and it's just going to stress you out. So like if you can, like, familiarize yourself with these tools. If you know that your interview is going to be hosted on a platform, like get on there, get familiar with it. if you're going to be presenting something and they want to see your portfolio, you want to be familiar on how you could screen share, how you could annotate, like have that stuff like ready on your computer, have your resume ready, have your portfolio ready, anything that you might need to talk to. So when it comes to game time, you're ready to go and you don't have some technical glitch, right? Now, when it comes to video interviews, you want to be mindful of your environment, right? So you want to be in a quiet place, you want to have good lighting, you want to be able to be focused on the interview itself and not distracted or have them be distracted by what's going on around you to the extent that you can control it, right? For your video setup, make sure your cam, mic are working. Try to look at the actual camera. Like a little quick trick on Zoom is if you minimize the Zoom window, you'll get the little tile and you could drag that up to the top center of your screen right by your camera, and it'll noticeably look like you're making eye contact with them instead of staring down at your keyboard, which is what happens when you're looking at it like fully blown out. So, make sure your cam, mic are working, and then your attire. You want to dress like you're actually going to the interview in person. So, if it's a large Fortune 500 company, you got to suit up. You got to be ready to go. You want to sit up straight. You want to smile. All these things come through just as much as they would during an in-person, but it's almost more important because it's harder to kind of build some of the same rapport you could in person. So just be mindful of that, right? These are things you can practice. You can like actually run through it with a friend. So just try to make yourself as comfortable as possible before you walk into that interview. So some common questions. Tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work with us? What strengths or skills would you bring to this role? Why should we hire you? What salary are you looking for, right? So like you want to be prepared to answer these, or in the case of the last one, not, right? Like you don't want to give your salary information. A perfectly acceptable response there is, I'm looking for a market competitive rate. Or another way to phrase it is, well, what have you like hired people? What range have you paid people for this role or similar roles in the past? So you put it back on them and you get a sense of like what the compensation is without directly giving them. So a quick like tips on how to prep. So practice with your roommates, spouse, friends, family. Use the STAR method. So when answering, think about the situation, the task, the action, the result, right? So you want to have like you don't want to just like give responses that don't provide like the depth that'll help them understand what you've actually done in your past roles, and how you contributed to the overall project, right? So like if they ask you, tell me about a time where you had a conflict at work, right? Or a conflict on a group project. It's a very common question. So you want to give them the situation. I was in a team of 5 and we were working on our final project for X, Y, and Z class. The challenge was we were missing, this piece of information, or we had, a technical challenge with this piece of software, and we only had, 2 days left before. So this is what, the action we took as a group is we decided to, split up the task, and I focused on this, and we the other 4 people did X, Y, and Z, and as a result, through this kind of triage and working through the conflict, we were able to complete it, the project on time, and this is how we performed, right? So you want to give a sense of kind of the situation, what the particular sticking point was, the actions, the results. You don't want to just like wing it. So like think about some kind of go-to stories that you've had in the past, and be able to like reference these and mold them towards different questions. So if you think about like projects that you've worked on that you were intimately involved in and know well, and you kind of like understand them, you can use them to answer a lot of different questions by just thinking about different like layers of them, and just practice this stuff. You really need to. So after the interview, you want to follow up, do it within 24 hours. I'm not going to talk about, you know, subsequent rounds of interviews or offers or kind of like the email strategy. I have some resources I can share at the end, but I'm gonna pause here. You know, I know job search is tough, especially right now. You got to keep at it. You got to trust the process. You got to keep your head up. And you know, I'm here to help, and I'm happy to answer any questions any of you might have.
Thanks for that awesome presentation, Newt. I didn't know half the things that you mentioned over there, to be honest. So there have been a few questions here and there during the time of the presentation. One of the questions that was actually asked was, how important is it to have, and this is a very basic question, I think, and I'm sure that you would have covered in the presentation as well, but just to reiterate this, how important is it to have multiple resumes?
Yeah, good question. I think it depends on the range of roles that you're applying to. So let's say if we're talking about software engineering and you're applying to, say, a front end role or a back end role, they have very different skills that might be involved and frameworks. So you might want like a back end oriented resume and a front end oriented resume. What I always recommend is to kind of just have like what I call the base resume, which has, you know, all of your stuff, your full history, all your skills, and then like as a reference point, and then whatever types of roles you're applying to, have something that's more tailored for it. So you might have that as the reference, then you have your front end, and if you do start applying to back end roles, then you can peel off from that base resume a different version. So to kind of swing back to your initial question, it depends on how many types of roles you're applying to. I would recommend making tweaks to your resume. It you can do it for every single job, but I would say if it's like a front end job and you have the skills already listed in your resume, you should be okay. But it's you might want another version if it's kind of like a stretch from what is covered in the version that you're typically using. So like maybe one resume for each type of role, I would say.
Got it. So another question that someone has asked is, on the salary front, you said that we don't need to be direct. What to do when it's a required field in the application and they accept only numbers in the box?
There's a few different fields of thought here. So one is that you put like 1 or 0 in there, and they're obviously, they know you're not going to, or like you put 1 in there, so they obviously know you're not going to take $1, but you've entered the field and they can move forward. And then you can have a discussion during the process. The other is you look at the market salary for that position. So you can go to Glassdoor, you can go to PayScale, you can, Indeed has this a little bit as well, and you can search the job title within that geographic market, and you can find the range, and you put a value that's within that salary range.
All right, that's smart.
So those are very different. I realize that. There's two different fields of thought on this though, so I share both.
Understood. And the person can, choose which one to go ahead with. So
Yep.
Another question that they have asked is, for people waiting for OPT approval, how do you recommend tackling the "Are you authorized to work in the US" question, especially when it's just a yes or no answer?
Good question. My gut would say if you're not authorized, then you can't say yes. If it's a direct drop down, right? Yeah, that's a tough one. If you want, I can ask my team and do a little bit of research on this, and you could email us at that job search at CareerScore. We also have a number of resources and tools that we can provide with anyone interested. But I would say if you haven't gotten the approval, you might need to select no. But I'll double check with my team to see if there's any other guidance there.
Another question that an attendee has asked is, when is it appropriate to ask about visa sponsorship?
I think you probably need to ask that sooner rather than later in the process. So maybe that's not on your first phone screen, but some like I think a better way to frame it is to understand whether they have sponsored people before, right? So like if you're talking to a company that's never sponsored someone, like one, the likelihood of them doing it is lower, but two, they might not understand what the process entails. So I think if you were to frame it around like if they have done that, then you can quickly understand. Like if they said, yeah, then you know that it's within the realm of possibility and you can navigate it. If it's no, then you could follow up and say, well, are you open to it? And this is kind of what it entails. If they say no, just realize and mentally note that you're going to have kind of a little bit of an uphill battle potentially. But you also don't want to just like jump in and go through 4 or 5 rounds of interviews. If it's a no and they're not willing to, then you don't want to be wasting your time. Some people might say just like go for it because it's good practice, and you should just go through all the rounds of the interview process as you can. But I think you probably want to know that, right?
Got it. And on that point, what you said, I think there's another question that one has asked on the quality versus quantity debate. Like during this COVID situation, if one really needs a job or one has been laid off, should they prioritize quality job roles and apply to just them and carefully, tailor their resumes and cover letter for those job roles, or should one just really aggressively go for applications to all the eligible job roles out there?
So the way that I like to explain this, and I assume many of you are on LinkedIn, right? And depending on how long you've been on there, you may have, gotten, a bunch of random next connection requests with people you've never interacted with, and they'll send you a kind of canned message, right? And I call that recruiter spam. You don't want to be candidate spam. And I think this was different 6 months ago before COVID, where you can just, apply to everything, not tailor your resume at all, not have a cover letter, not try to reach out because the job market was different. Um, I think you should be more cautious just applying to everything. I think you should still apply to, depending on your goals, at least a minimum of 10 jobs a week. But it depends a little bit on what like roles you're applying to and how deep the job market is. So for instance, if you're applying to software engineering roles, there's still a ton of them out there, right? There's a lot of openings. If you're applying to something that's very niche, you might not you might need to be more crafted in each application because you don't want to burn through the 100 companies it might be for a very like particular specialized role. So I hope that that's helpful color.
Uh, Another question that one has asked is, how does, I mean, and since a, a lot of us have been laid off over the past few years, and every now and then how it happens is, when that happens, when the letting go, when the laying off actually happens, that is when the job search or anything, the preparation around the job search starts. That's when we'll actually start building the resumes. That is where we'll actually put the looking for job opportunities on LinkedIn as well. So how exactly, or what is would be your advice to make sure that one is always a little prepped up, because these situations are not really expected. It's just a very unforeseen circumstances which through under which one is laid off during work. So how can one make sure that they can stay active in the job search even while they are not looking for jobs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a few things you can do. One is I recommend even, you might be in a job, you might be happy. I think probably like once every few months, you should think about the projects and things you've been working on in your role and add them to that base resume, which is, the laundry list of everything you're working on. And it's way more than what you'd send to a company. You want to prune that for the specific roles, but by doing it as you go, you'll actually remember all the details of the projects you're working on, and you want that like quantification and context. So um, that's one. So your resume, you have the information you need. And by doing that, you'll also kind of be thinking about your career subconsciously. The other is if I feel like it's healthy to kind of think about companies you'd want to work at, just like on an ongoing basis. It's like you see a new, piece of news or something on LinkedIn, and you're like, that's a really interesting company. I like that project. I like that initiative. I like how they're approaching this, social situation, and their response. Just drop those companies into a note, and we have a tool that helps with this at CareerScore. So you can just save those opportunities. And then when you do, if you do get laid off, at least you have a short list to start with of companies that you might be interested in. So that's, we talked about resumes, we talked about, constantly kind of scanning for opportunities. The last one is, and I think this shouldn't be discounted, is your network. Um, you know, it's, you want to keep in touch with people, and you don't want, yeah, I always try to avoid just thinking about relationships transactionally. So let's say you have a friend who works in, the music industry as an example, and they're a loose connection, but like anytime you see something that's an interesting piece of news about that industry or new development, you share it with them, right? This is called content-based networking. And it just lets them know that you're thinking about them. It doesn't take a ton of effort. It's just something that popped up on your radar. And then if you do have to jump into the search and you need to reach out to that person, it's not like it's a cold relationship. So I don't like to think about connections as transactional, but I think that for a lot of people that shy away from networking, that content-based networking is very easy to do. And look, we're all on our phones and looking at way too much content all the time. So just like being able to share that with people, can be an easier way to maintain relations at a distance.
Got it. Got it. And what would your advice be for students who are currently, let's say, uh, like in their schools and looking for internships? Any sort of indications for them, or any sort of strategies for them to be ahead in their job search or in the internship search?
Yeah, I would say, look at alumni and look at people who've gotten these internships at your schools before, be it through, networks in your university, or looking at alumni on LinkedIn and seeing who's held these roles, and reach out to the people who had these internships in the past year or so. See if the internship programs are still rolling, and try and build those relationships to get into those opportunities. There are a couple tools that I mentioned for finding internships during the presentation. There's another one called Hire Scholars that they have been pretty active in helping companies get internships in front of people during COVID, and I'll take a note to add that to the resources for follow-up. But yeah, I would say, lean on your school networks, use some of these virtual resources, but don't be afraid to reach out to people.
Got it. Understood. And so also, I mean, with the job search, there is a whole new segment of acquiring new skills, right, to be ahead and to make sure that you are more qualified, and that you stand out more in your job applications. What can one do to acquire new skills, which would not take a lot of time, but at the same time adds a lot of value to the resume?
Yeah, I mean, I think careers have changed, right? We need to be constantly evolving, learning, picking up new skills, be it a new tool, a piece of software, or a new strategy. So I think that yes, it's something that you need to be mindful of in the job search, but it's a careers today are a lifelong set of adaptation after adaptation. So it's something to just, you got to get used to. It's hard for me to answer, the specific quick win skills without context as to the particular types of roles because skills are so specific to types of opportunities.
Got it.
So
And
if you have a
with
few
that,
in mind, I could try to answer it, but otherwise it'd be tough.
okay. Well, analytics is something that's been a very upcoming stream, right? Analytics, data analytics, business analytics. And do you think that there could be platforms where one could really hone their skills and, stand out? Because a lot of students actually end up coming from masters to the US. And that's like about 56% of the whole, US student population, international student population rather. And so how can these students, and a lot of them actually end up going for a lot of technical courses, so and analytics is a huge segment in that. I
Yeah,
mean,
so
apart from,
speaking,
go ahead.
yeah, so I guess, no, that's helpful. So with analytics in mind and thinking about the way, data science and analytics have really evolved over the past, 3 to 5 years,
Mhm.
there are online resources and tools that you can use to both build that skill set and have projects that might be marketable. So for instance, there's a website called Kaggle that is oriented around data projects where you can get access to data sets, collaborate with other data analysts or data scientists to solve these data problems. And you can then package that and show, a tangible data project to a prospective employer. And they're pretty fun, right? So that's one. There's a plethora of online courses and certifications, but I think you want to think about that deliverable and a portfolio and something you can present to a company and frame it around what the potential impact of that project or analysis might be. So um, uh, I would think about it to like being project oriented. So like Kaggle might be helpful there in terms of like skills. Like I know Python and SQL are very helpful in terms of manipulating data. So that would be like a language oriented approach. But I think you want to try and have a project to be able to speak to said language, right? So I think Kaggle might be a good starting point on that front.
Got it. And so a lot of, I mean, actually, this has happened so many times in the COVID situation where people who have been in their jobs for more than 4 or 5 years have, suddenly been laid off. And, when there's a thing that happens when you're being working for so long that you lose sight of how do I stand out in the job market, right? So is there any platform or any sort of a like a tool that one can use or any sort of a set of activities that one can do to assess themselves and make a clear picture, have a clear picture of where do they stand in terms of the job market, or how do they do a self-assessment of sorts? Is does that
There's a No, that makes sense. There's a few different kind of like strategies and self-assessment frameworks. Typically, it's called like a career assessment or a career audit. So you could like Google those as like self-assessments. There are a few platforms, but their names are escaping me. So let me take a note and I can follow up if there are any particular ones that come to mind. But really, to kind of like break down what you want to do, you want to think about, what you've been doing, what unique skills and kind of the story of experience you've built. You want to look at, roles and opportunities within the market, assuming you want to stay within the same space. If you do want to make a pivot and go after, a different career or opportunity, which, which happens all the time, you should think about what unique insights you've gotten from your path so far and how they might translate to something else. So I'll give you a couple, story examples very quickly. I worked with a woman named Sarah, a few years back who had worked in digital marketing for a number of years. And, something happened. She wasn't, she lost the role she was in. She wanted to make a change. She had kind of gotten burned out on, the pure digital marketing. She picked up, some coding skills. And with the combination of that marketing know-how and the coding skills, she positioned herself as a growth hacker, and really was thinking about systems of growth for companies. And in doing so, moved into kind of a newer hybrid role, that leveraged her prior experience and new skill set at a much higher salary, and was exciting and fresh for her. So
Got it. That helps. Uh, a very specific question actually has just popped up, and it's about any advice which you might have for job search in niche industries like international development.
yeah, so I guess it's very case by case specific, but if it is a very niche industry, identify who the leaders are within that space. So say it's international development, think about the three, top 10 like leading, companies or organizations that you'd want to work for, and kind of do the strategy that I mentioned earlier, where you look at the leadership of those companies on LinkedIn, you follow them, because what you'll find is, one, you can apply to all those companies, right? But what you'll find by following the leadership is they're often engaged on LinkedIn in other organizations or related ones, and all the leadership tend to kind of like interact or know each other on these platforms. And then you'll discover secondary organizations who are also within the niche that might not have been on your radar to start. So I would say like start with the very like leading ones that and then kind of do some of this research to kind of build the radar around that kind of central set of firms.
Okay. Okay. I hope that answer helped your question. Uh, then there is a question around so networking, I assume, is a huge a tool for accelerating the job search. Are there any common mistakes that students tend to do during networking that they should avoid, especially in these times?
Yeah, I think the most common, or one of the most common things that people do in networking is they kind of like start with an ask. So they'll reach out to someone without any sort of like real introduction or kind of like relationship building, and they'll just be like, you know someone they don't know, hey, I applied to this job, would you mind like referring me, or something of that nature. There's not really You're not really like showing any sort of like interest in that person or like building a relationship. You're just asking them for something, right? So earlier in the presentation, we were talking about, you know, um, finding relevant pieces of information, um, about the company, or about that individual, and having a genuine interest in that person or the organization, in
Mhm.
trying to like learn about that. And then if it makes sense, you can have an ask, but if you just lead with it, it's likely to go nowhere.
Okay, understood. Got it. I think apart from that, I think we've covered some questions here. Let me just check few others too. There is a question about dealing with a question which I think we have already covered a little bit, but there have been questions within the applicant tracking system that ask whether the candidate would need sponsorship in the future. It's not right now, but it's in the future. So will someone handle this differently, or should it be the same strategy as we did for the previous question that we answered?
So I love this question, and something I probably should have surfaced when we were talking about decoding application requirements. So It's a subtle but important distinction. So, a company might flat out say, if you don't meet the requirements, then you can't apply. But they do this within cybersecurity, where they will say if you have clearance or can be eligible for clearance, then you're able to apply. So if you can meet the requirements in the future, and it has that distinction in language, then you can go for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very important idea that applies, yes, to being eligible, but also to other parts of the application and skill requirements that companies ask for. So yeah, in that case, I would say go for it, and also be mindful of how that can apply elsewhere.
Got it. Got it. Uh, there's a question, I think, from one attendee that if you're not hearing back from employers right now, what else can one do to stay a little active and motivated in their job search?
Yeah, so I know it can be incredibly tough, especially right now. I would say, if you're not hearing back, and you're just applying and not reaching out, try to find a person at the company. I know how intimidating it can be to just reach out to people you don't know, but like try, being more active on some of these platforms. It really does make a difference. In terms of, motivation and keeping yourself, kind of in the hunt, so to speak. Uh, what I have found helpful, in kind of working with a lot of job seekers over the years is just like setting a schedule and also like rewarding yourself, right? So, if you have a goal to apply to, a few jobs a day, for instance, like apply to those jobs and like do something you enjoy, right? Like, smell the roses a little bit. It can't just be, all work. You got to put in the work, but find something that you enjoy, and do the things you need to do, and kind of reward yourself for doing it, right? You gotta push, but you gotta, not be brutal on yourself in these very challenging times.
Quite true, actually. And before we wrap up the webinar, do you have any last words for the attendees? Any word of advice that you would like to offer them before we part ways?
I would just say, if you're job searching right now, and similar to this last question, I know how tough it can be. You got to trust the process. You got to keep at it, and really, be kind with yourself. We have an email here on this question slide. If you have questions that you weren't able to get to, or you'd like some, job search tips and resources, just go ahead and email us at that job search at careerscore.com. We have, people on our team that would be happy to help or point you in the right direction if we're at all able to. And thank you all so much for your time today. I hope you found it helpful, and thank you, our boss, for setting this up.
It was a pleasure actually hosting you here, Newt, and it's really kind of you to invite questions from the audience for helping out in the job search even after the webinar. Thank you so much. Also, thank you so much, all our attendees. I hope you were benefited from this interaction with Newt. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us at webinars@empowerfinancing.com, or if you want to connect with Newt and his team, you already have a email address right there on the screen. Please take a note and stay safe. Have a nice day, everyone. Goodbye.